what I really wanted to hit on is something you said about, and you've talked about it before with me, the R&D roadmap.
Yeah.
You know, quite frankly, what does that have to do with sales and commercialization? They're totally different
Yeah.
departments with different focuses and objectives. How the collaboration. How does that work?
Well, it's really, you would maybe on the surface think that, but it really isn't. They really they can't operate independently.
Right.
So, in order for a salesperson or a sales team to be effective in moving revenue and moving testing methodology or platforms into the clinical setting, you have to have a product that's going to be readily accepted and adopted by the clinician on the other end. And so, how do you know what that product needs to have? How many genes in a gene panel? What conditions do you need to test for in a
Right.
non-invasive prenatal test? Those kinds of questions have to be answered before R&D really sets to work doing what they're doing. I think initially the R&D idea is there, and so the beachhead product or the first product may be built on that idea.
Right.
But especially in software as a service, where you're constantly updating the technology and the platform and adding new features, sales and commercialization has to have a seat at that table during the roadmap planning because resources are finite, right? There isn't Most companies don't have unlimited resources to go run in 45 different directions
Right.
when they're figuring out what their next product's going to be on their roadmap. So understanding where the uptake can be, how long will that take, what's the reimbursement landscape, all of those kinds of
Yes.
questions have to be answered at the same time that the R&D folks are figuring out what their priorities are. I always like to tell this little story about my time at SarahCare because as an initial member of the clinical genomics group at SarahCare, we had unbelievably brilliant scientists that are still there, believe it or not, but amazingly brilliant, of the best I've ever seen. And scientists inherently want to solve problems and are very interested in the really hard problems, right? But sometimes the really hard problems aren't the ones that are going to keep the lights on in this short term. So we got into the practice of having these R&D, summits twice a year where you did have all the stakeholders sitting at the table to discuss what the next 6 months, year, 3 years, even 5 years was going to look like from product development. And that included, you know, uh, what's market research telling us coming out of the marketing department? What are the sales reps hearing from the clinicians that are using the existing products? All of those kinds of pieces of feedback were put into play, and then the scientists also had their own priorities that they personally and professionally wanted to pursue. And so it was really interesting because our head of R&D had them all really have to put together presentations and make the case for why their project that they wanted to work on for the next 6 months or a year was the one we should move forward with. So they would put together, PowerPoint presentations that included market research and reimbursement landscape and working, obviously getting that information from all the other groups that were seated at the table, but really making the full business case for why we're making an R&D decision. So that really cemented in my mind how important it is
Yeah.
for those decisions to not be made in a vacuum, and to have as much feedback, especially from the grassroots level, as you can.